Hello and welcome to Unprofessional Engineering. My name is James.
And you have Montezuma.
Wow.
No, I'm sorry. I mean Luke.
I feel like every week you need a new title.
No, that was...
Weren't you like Clean Tech Luke a couple weeks ago?
I have such a hard time just with the research that I have to do, and now you want me to come up
Being
with...
clever on top of it?
Yeah.
Well, that was a good lead-in because we're putting together a 3-part series. I'm calling it The Civilization Smackdown.
Whoa.
You like that?
You gave that some thought, didn't you?
Aztecs versus Mayans versus Egyptians.
Have a feeling that the Mayan and the Aztecs, a little bit of the research that we started with the Aztecs, they're going to be really similar, I think.
You think? I mean, they were like neighbors, right?
I haven't dug into the Mayans yet since this week we're talking about all about the Aztecs. So I didn't do a ton of Mayan stuff, but we'll see.
All right. Well, we're going to find out who had the best engineering and inventions, buildings, who contributed the most to modern technology, all that stuff.
So right off the bat, Aztecs, they're loco. They're
loco.
They're totally crazy. So I have to
See what
start
you
us with
did.
a little bit of history, right?
Okay, go for it.
So the way the Mayan culture,
The Mayans?
The way the Aztec civilization, wow, I'm already messing this up. So the way the Aztec civilization started, and this is all documented pretty well. I watched a documentary the other night about this. So the Aztecs were a tribe in the basin area in Mexico, and they were kind of a nomadic tribe, weren't too big, yada yada yada. The Aztec decide that, hey, we need to merge with this other tribe. Let's marry one of the daughters of the chieftain. So
that's how that works.
Yeah. So she's getting all prepared and all, getting ready for the wedding. They're taking her to what she thinks. Now, this isn't the Aztec. This is the other tribe. They're thinking they're taking her to the ceremony. Here, they take her to the top of this pyramid. They cut her chest open, pull her living heart out, and sacrifice her to the sun god, right?
Like Indiana Jones style.
Yeah. And then a couple days later, it's like, hey, let's go meet up with dad, like the girl's dad, the chief from the other priest. They totally flayed her skin off her body, and they had a guy wearing it. And what happened was the Aztecs got chased down onto this island area, which is now currently where Mexico City is. This used to be a ginormous lake, and they got chased onto this island, and basically they were kind of arch enemies until the Aztecs took over the whole region. But that's how it started, was through this sacrifice and this crazy, it was a pretty crazy start to the Aztec Empire.
All right. So that was way more than I had.
Yeah, it was bizarre. Very bizarre.
So I had that they settled by, and I'm doing this for you.
Oh my God.
They settled by Lake Texcoco in 1248 and were expelled by these people. They booted them out.
Yep.
And they were in Tepeneca.
You said that one actually really well.
Thank you. So and then 1325, they founded the city of Tenochtitlan.
You did that one actually really well, too.
Which became the focal point of the empire.
Yep.
Right?
It was basically an island city in this enormous basin area. So it was basically totally surrounded by water. So that's at 1325 is whenever they started.
Very cool. So then I saw that it was like a 3-city alliance, pretty much, that made up the Aztecs, of the 2 cities, Tenochtitlan and Texcoco. And Tlacopan. How about that?
Yep.
Tlacopan.
Yep, that works.
And that
for
formed
me.
the empire until the pesky Spanish showed up.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that.
All right. So do you want to talk a bit about the technology that they put out there?
Yeah, so first of all, they got driven to this really swampy lake area.
Oh, you're going to steal the coolest
one. And the way that I understood that this happened was, so imagine this enormous lake. It's anywhere from 6 to 12 feet deep, so it's not super deep, but it's really shallow, really muddy, marshy.
It's not really deep, but it's really shallow. Okay,
yeah,
good.
Come on. Well, you got to say both, right? So,
Okay.
So they can't build anything here, and they were basically kind of held hostage here for a little while until their empire grew. So they needed to build stuff. So what they started to do, and this was one of the first times in history that they can kind of see this happening, at least in the Americas, is they used pylons. So they would take pieces of wood, basically trees, about 4 to 12 inches in diameter, about 30 feet long, and they would pound these into the ground. And then they would fill in the open area with lava rock and additional dirt, and it would make this extremely solid foundation that they could build houses on, temples on, you name it. And they basically built an entire city in this lake area with these pylons.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty amazing.
Like, how do they know to do that?
I don't know. They're smarter than us.
I guess. Like, I wouldn't think about that. I'd be like, let's just move.
I'd get there today and be like, ugh, I'll just die. What else was cool about that is that their tools and weaponry was kind of behind the times, I'm going to say. They were made out of stone and copper, and that's because they didn't have access to iron or bronze to work with. They also, even though their tools weren't really high-tech, they were advanced enough that they actually created drills as well, which I thought was pretty crazy. And they were made of reeds or bones or things like that. So they could like drill holes into stuff.
And the thing that's kind of crazy to think about is during this time frame where they're building these enormous cities, and we'll get into some of the other technology that's actually pretty slick. This is whenever over in Europe, like the plague was happening, and like people.
Yeah.
So it's just crazy to think that, you know, here in Europe, or not here, in Europe, you know, the plague was happening, and there was, you know, all kinds of crazy things happening with, like, you know, knights, and it just those two things happening at the same time. Like, I think of Aztecs as like thousands of years ago, but it's only like 400 or 500 years ago. It's not, you know, way back when, and that's what I think it is. So that's why it seems so advanced, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. Did you also see that they actually didn't know about the wheel or have access to horses?
Yeah, so apparently there were no beasts of burden.
No beasts of burden, no wheels.
No wheels.
All transportation was difficult unless it was done by river. And so they really depended on canoes, which they created, to use the river and waterways to not only move themselves around, but also transport materials.
Fun fact.
Ooh,
there
fun
was one stone when they were building the temple that they said took 50,000 men to move.
Wow.
Like pulling and dragging this thing. Now, how they lined up 50,000 people, and maybe it wasn't all at one time. I don't know. It didn't go into a bunch of detail. But more than likely, they were using, you know, the homemade ropes, and they were probably using logs as rollers. So they were using, even though they didn't know the wheel, they were still using things like logs to move things along. So.
Yeah, like that's wheel-esque, right?
Wheel-esque. I think that's probably how it started, right?
It's kind of like Stonehenge, right? How they move those giant stones around.
Aliens.
Why don't they go check out that episode while we're talking
look
about
at you
it?
doing a plug.
Plug.
Look at you doing a plug.
Did you also see they invented popcorn? Yuck. I hate popcorn.
I don't know if I can be friends with you now.
Unless it has like cheddar cheese on it, I'm out.
You don't like popcorn?
No.
Oh.
There's just so many better options. So let's move on from that. The thing I thought is probably the most impressive is that they were the first society to have a mandatory education for their peoples. And it didn't matter your gender, your rank, or your position in the society, we'll go with. I don't know. Tribe might be the wrong word, right? Giant tribe. There were 3 different schools, though. One school was for girls, and 2 schools were for boys. So I guess it sort of mattered your gender, but you still got to go to school. The girls got to learn about religion, and then a bunch of domestic skills like how to cook and sew and weave and raise children. Upper-class boys got to go to their own school for nobles and rich kids.
And I think they became a lot of priests and those sorts of types of things.
Yeah, so this is like the private schools of their day, right?
Yeah.
So they go to private school, and they learned stuff like the law and medicine, writing, engineering, and building. So, you know, us engineers were still pretty highly sought after back then as well.
And then the other kids went to Votech, is my guess.
And they went to Votech, which there's nothing wrong with that.
No, I love Votech.
Yeah, and there were so they were also trained in tangible skills and also interpretation of dreams. So I thought that was interesting.
I'm kind of a Votecher.
You are kind of a Votecher.
Whenever I was in high school, I did lots of metal shop, wood shop, CAD. That's what got me into what I'm doing.
It is. So the other classes also concerned Aztec history and religion, and then the other school, the third school for the commoners, the Votechers, the Lukes, was more relaxed, and it was for raising warriors and farmers, basically teaching you what it took to be a good farmer, as well as doing things to train you to get ready for battle. And these things would be like requiring them to sleep outside under thin blankets and eat hard bread, and basically just kind of hardened them up to go stabby some people.
Yeah, I wouldn't be doing that.
That wasn't for you?
No, definitely not.
They did get some common instruction, though, so they got some history and religion and etiquette, and they learned the important rituals of their people. So I thought this was kind of crazy that way back then, they were like the first civilization, or one of them, to have mandatory schooling.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about schooling just here in the United States, I mean, in modern day, I mean, it hasn't been something that everybody's had access to.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
still a problem,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. So before we go on with any more of the inventions that they came up with, I think it's time for a word from our sponsor.
Oh my goodness, I'm assuming that it's Pontiac.
Why?
The Aztec.
Oh no!
Don't stop. Don't go into it. Save that for later.
Good idea.
I'm assuming it's Pontiac.
Okay, it is not Pontiac, and for good reason. I think they are.
I think they're out of business.
I'm certain they are.
Okay.
Shoutouts, though.
Oh, do we have a lot?
We have 3 this
What?
episode. Yes, Jeff S. says they're going to use the boring technique under the Chesapeake Bay coming up soon, though Elon isn't involved. If you don't know what we're talking about, we have an episode on the Boring Company.
Is this going to be one of those?
It's going to be a plug
a lot of
episode.
shows? Okay.
He has an idea for us to talk about, and that's port technology. So like stuff like ships. So he listened to our shipping container episode.
Okay.
If you haven't listened to that one, go check out shipping containers and what we can use them for. But he's talking about like the big cranes and the boats and the docking and porting. Yeah, all of that good stuff.
Okay.
And he also has a throwback for traffic signals, the evolution of them.
Ooh.
I don't know anything about it, so maybe that is interesting. Our friend JP wrote in to let us know he works right next to the Manitoba Hydro Building, which we talked about in the Clean Energy episode
We did.
just a few weeks ago. So check out the Clean Energy episode. I think that's 4 for anyone counting. And then James K wrote in. Let's see here. Oh, he doesn't like the mistreatment of animals because he was listening to our dairy farming episode.
I know.
And he stomached it. He said he's going to listen to it anyways. If you haven't listened to the dairy farming episode, there's a lot of cool stuff about how we raise cows and treat them now. But anyways, he listened to the episode. He appreciated our love for cows, and especially you, like going into the PETA, like mistreatment of cows and things like that. He isn't vegan or vegetarian yet, but that's mostly because he's a poor college kid. And so maybe when he stops being poor, he would do that. But he suggests maybe we do an episode on the impact on the environment if everybody went vegan. Which I think that's kind of interesting. It might be a lot of work for us, but
It is.
It's an interesting idea.
Yeah, so I'd be okay with that if it was like vegan except for like
Cheese.
bacon.
Oh, bacon. Yeah, that's a good one too. So anyways, if any of you have anything to tell us what we did wrong or episode ideas like all of our good friends here, email us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com. If you want to check out any of those episodes that I've dropped, all 5 of them so far, go ahead and press the subscribe button on iTunes or wherever you listen and write us a review.
Yeah, get
We're
us
up
a
to
review.
54.
What?
Yeah, rolling hard.
And we'll send you some stickers if you can prove it.
Oh, yeah, the best stickers.
Yeah.
All right, moving on.
Alrighty, so a couple other things just about just their general engineering and technology.
Sure.
So we talked about they were using these pylons or piles that they would drive into the ground to build their cities. Because they were on this island, basically in the center of this lake, they needed a way to easily get back and forth. You mentioned they used canoes. So what they did was they actually built these roads, causeways that would go from the island to the mainland. And these things were, in some cases, like 30 feet wide. They were 10 to 12 feet above the level of the lake. And they used the same technique. They would drive the piles, but this would allow them to, they had drawbridges on them. This would allow them to go back and forth from the mainland, transport, goods and bring wood in and food and do all sorts of things. So crazy utilization of this engineering technique where they use these piles. And then I have one more thing on the piles.
Okay.
Because this is pretty much how they built their city.
They built their city on rock and roll.
Well, they did.
Okay,
Well, we know
go
that.
ahead.
So they use the same technique. So imagine this city, middle of a lake, and like, where do you get your food, right?
That is a great question, Luke.
So how do you get your food? So they created these things.
This
they were
is my
man-made
favorite.
islands. They were called Chinampas.
Chinampas.
Chinampas. So they would basically take these piles, they would drive them into the ground, and then they would take wood and reeds, pile it up on top, and then they'd put mud on top of that. And these things were roughly 300 feet long by 30 feet wide, so like the shape of like a football field, and they would use these to plant their crops.
It's interesting. I have 90 feet, but that's okay.
Oh, I'm sure they varied.
They probably did.
But they built these in basically, grids, so they could easily pull up a canoe beside it, jump off, harvest whatever they need to harvest, plant new stuff, put it on the boat, and take off. It was amazing way of doing that. So that way they didn't have to rely on the mainland for their food.
How did they fertilize it, Luke?
I'm guessing with poo.
That's right. I just wanted you to say it because you tend to do that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was the most interesting, is how they made these floating gardens, put them together. They could raise corn and squash and beans, a lot of corn. And they also raised their animals there as well. So
Is this better than your garden?
it is better than my garden, I would guess.
Okay.
Except deer can't get to mine. Ha ha ha.
Deer can't get to theirs either unless they can swim.
They probably can swim.
Yeah, deer can't swim. You're
I
right.
assume.
Okay.
All right, so what else did they do? Did you know they invented chocolate?
I don't know if they... Yeah, I guess they did.
They get credit for inventing chocolate, and they even used it as a currency.
Well, it wasn't actually chocolate that they used.
It wasn't.
It was
the beans.
It was the cacao beans themselves, which if you haven't watched our episode about the manufacture of chocolate.
That's right.
So
all about cacao.
I feel like that's number 6.
That is number 6, yep.
So that was a really good one. But they would actually use this as their form of currency. So it wasn't just that they used it for enjoyment and they would drink it and eat it and do all that sort. It was one of their primary ways to trade currency. So interestingly, about 100 cacao beans is what it would cost to get a blanket. So if you were in
like a
the
good deal.
Aztec market, you needed about 100 beans.
Is that a smallpox blanket or just a regular one?
I feel like it's not a smallpox blanket. It's just a regular one.
Let's move on.
Yes.
They also had their own numbering system using a base value of 20. Did you see that?
I did not.
It was primarily used for calculating taxes. Ouch. That hurts. Even back then, they had
taxing the
taxes.
people.
But I found this cool little numbering system where they would use dots to represent the numbers, but 5 would be a long dashed line, 10 would be 2 dashed lines. They had like a little flag or another symbol for 20, and then arrow-looking things for 100,
Ooh,
20,
I like that.
100, 200, 300. And then 8,000 was some sort of cool-looking, like, I don't even know what it is, but they had all sorts of symbols.
That looks like the headdress that the king would wear.
That does look like the headdress, I agree. Did you see that they were big into the medicines as well?
Yeah, I did.
They created all sorts of medicine to ease insomnia, epilepsy, high blood pressure.
I think most of this was some form of cocaine. So I don't know if it was really medicine, but it was. It was.
You sure felt better.
Yeah, you felt way better.
We don't condone using cocaine.
No,
kids.
we don't.
All right. One of the important works that shed light on the Aztec herbal practices was known as the Badianas manuscript from 1552. And it describes that they used over 180 different plants and trees for treatments and ailments. Some of them were kind of bizarre by today's standards, like pain or heat in the heart would include ingredients like turquoise or red coral or burning of a stag. So, so maybe they didn't all work, but I think there was a lot of merit to some of the stuff they did.
I think there definitely was, but it's really tough to trust the medicine of a civilization where, like, the first thing, I got a headache, I got to go sacrifice somebody.
Yeah, that hurts.
It was a very bloody civilization that was like their primary way of appeasing the gods. Like anytime they thought anything bad would happen, they would just like kill a couple people.
Yeah. They also invented gum, and I just threw that in for a fun fact of the Spanish word for chewing gum is chiquil.
Chiclets.
That's right. So I figure that's where chiclets comes from, right?
Other thing about gum is rubber.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't the rubber that you and I think of nowadays. This was a much softer rubber, so that's why there isn't a ton of fossil artifacts that were left by them because they probably dissolved. But one of their crazy games they played, that
ball game,
that handball game they would play, it was actually a rubber ball that they would use, and you'd have to hit it through those hoops on the side of the arena. Interesting. And I don't know if this is just one of those things you read in, it's just on the internet and it's fake, but apparently you wanted to win so that your team would get sacrificed.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I feel like that's one of those rumors. Like I was doing, like when I did a little more research, it didn't seem to add up.
Did you ever see people play that?
I saw a bunch of high school kids play it.
If you go to Mexico, you can go see demonstrations of it. It's very cool.
It's got to be difficult.
Yeah, it looks tough.
Yeah.
Like way harder than basketball.
Yeah, but you know what? It's probably like tennis, kind of.
Yeah,
tennis
kind of.
is easy,
Anyone
isn't
can
it?
do that, yeah. So one last thing, they did have 2 different kinds of calendars to keep track of time, because that's what calendars do. So I'm not going to get into a lot of detail because we know what calendars are, but that's that. And the reason I don't want to get into too much detail is because we have to move on for this week's Luke's Rant.
Okay, so this rant is really specific, and we kind of alluded to it before in our sponsorship opportunity from Pontiac, and this is the Aztec. So I don't know if I complained about this before in one of our Supercard episodes. Make sure you check that episode out.
That's right. Oh, that's a good episode. And you know what is powering supercars is Everything Engines, which is another one of our great episodes.
So the Pontiac Aztec. So I feel like, and I don't know why they chose Aztec as the name of the car. So the Pontiac Aztec is famously the ugliest, most poorly designed exterior vehicle of all time. At least that's what some people think. Interestingly, though, if you see some of these new crossovers, like the Subaru Crosstrek and some of these other, they're very boxy, they're very utilitarian. So I think the Aztec, my personal opinion, is it was ahead of its time.
Just like the Aztecs.
Just like the Aztecs. And I think if something like the Aztec came out now, I think it would actually be a little more popular if you look at how well, these Jeep Renegades and all these small SUVs that are boxy and utilitarian are doing. So it's kind of a shame that Pontiac chose.
So you're actually ranting that the Aztec gets a bad name, like bad rap.
I do.
Because you kind of like it now.
I think it was ahead of its time.
Okay.
I think it was ahead of its time, and I think Pontiac actually chose a terrible name. I mean, it would literally be like naming a car. I mean, it's after it'd be like, oh, the Pontiac Germans, or you name it after a civilization, or the Romans. It's just a bad name. Like, I don't know why Aztec worked. So
okay,
it's a bit
then.
of a dual rant. Sorry.
Yeah, Let's move on to some of the buildings that they did.
So before we do buildings...
Oh, goodness, there's more.
So obviously this growing population in the capital city required water, and they built...
Oh, that's right.
This is crazy.
Yeah.
It was a 3-mile, 2-channel aqueduct. And again, keep in mind, in Europe, people were dying of the plague. And here in Mesoamerica, they're building an aqueduct with 2 channels. 2 channels, why, you ask? So that if they needed to maintain one and block it up and clean it or fix it, the other channel on the other side would still continue to flow.
Yeah, that's rather impressive.
So 3 miles long, and it was 2 channels, so there would be an uninterrupted flow of water. And one of the palaces that they built, they actually had to build an earthen bridge so that they could get the water from one side of a mountain to the other side. So they basically filled a gorge with land, built an aqueduct across it, and it actually fed the palace, the king's bath, all the gardens. So crazy good engineering when it came to water and cleanliness. And they were, in comparison to Romans and Europe, they were
I don't know if that's
people.
accurate. I feel like the Romans had aqueducts way before.
Yeah, but they were not as clean as I think.
Okay. Didn't they have bathhouses?
Yeah.
I don't know. We do know that England was full of rats and killing people.
Yes.
All right. Now can we talk about buildings?
Sorry.
I feel like the aqueducts were kind of buildings, right?
Yeah, it's all engineering.
All right. So Tenochtitlan was the main Aztec city. I'm getting better at it.
Perfect pronunciation.
It was built on top of another city, but it actually means place of those who have the road of the gods.
Wow.
And at its peak, the population grew to over 200,000 people. It was one of the largest cities in the world at that time.
That's impressive.
I suppose if Mexico City's right there still, it's still one of the largest cities, right?
Yep.
So that's pretty cool. You seem to have all sorts of stuff you want to talk about. Do you want to go?
So the temple itself, which was at the center of the city. So this was probably, at the time, it was one of the biggest structures. So at the base, the temple was roughly 50 feet by 300 feet at the base. So this thing was super big, 15 stories tall. So this is about between 180 to 200 feet. It was built for the gods of rain and war. And interestingly, they built this thing 7 times since 1325. So that date we mentioned at the very beginning, they just kept on
After
making
they got
it
chased
bigger
out.
and bigger and bigger. And so they would literally physically build the temple right on top of the other temple. And I saw a picture of it, and they did like this cutaway section, and there was like these big hollow sections where they just built one building right on top of the other, which I thought was pretty cool.
If you ever go to Cancun, which is basically
went
America
there.
South, I was saying to our listeners, I was just looking at you while I said
Okay.
it. You can go and check out all of these things. It's a multiple hour ride away, but it's well worth it. Seeing the pyramids and all the ruins.
So
and
you
things like
went
that.
to Chichen Itza.
Yeah.
Is that the one you went to?
Yep.
So
There's another one as well that I've gone to.
So side story, I'm at Chichen Itza with my brother, and the first thing they say is don't feed or pet the dogs. And I'm like,
Come
how
on,
bad
it's a
can this
dog,
be?
yeah.
They're cute. So there's this little dog, cute as all get out. I go to pet him, and he basically turns on me and literally chases me. I had to run around in circles, and finally the guide we were with like kind of kicked or
It's like,
shooed
hey,
the
I
dog
told you
away.
not to feed him.
And immediately after that, we hear all these gasps and screaming. We're leaving, and we turn and we look, and someone is falling down the steps at the Chichen Itza. Because when we were
You're
there,
not allowed to climb them anymore.
when we went, you could
Yeah.
climb. They had a rope going up the center. Someone fell down. I'm guessing they died because it looked like when they.
That's
like,
a lot of
we
steps.
saw it when they got close to the bottom, and they were like just kind of tumbling, lifeless. And they had an ambulance just waiting there because apparently this happens all the time. So the ambulance pulled up, and then I jumped into a cenote.
I don't know what that means.
It's a giant hole in the ground. It's filled with water.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they have
I
those
jumped
there.
into one of those.
Yeah, those are cool. Were you allowed to do that?
Yeah. It was,
Oh, okay.
it was a part of the tour.
So parts of the temple, how about that?
Shoot.
There's a reception area for the king to entertain his guests. The emperor's room, which was the largest, most extravagant one, of course. Meeting rooms, where the throne was located, because, of course, you need to sit on the throne as this is happening so you can be powerful. And then storage rooms for all the gifts and other stuff. But I also saw that at the time there were 2 zoos inside of the temple, as well as an aquarium and some other crazy stuff. But I believe that it took something like 300 people to be employed to take care of all of the animals that were inside of this.
So the aquarium was fresh and salt water.
That's crazy.
One of the zoos was dedicated to birds of prey. So these were like, hawks and eagles and different things they'd probably use for hunting. And then the other one was like jaguars and leopards and lions and all kinds of crazy exotic cats.
I want those roaming around my house. Yeah, that's crazy. So they just had their own zoos and aquarium inside of this as well.
So basically, these Aztec like leaders were like Mike Tyson.
They were a lot like Mike Tyson.
Didn't he have a?
They had the face tattoo.
They had the face tattoos. They
That's
owned
like a tribal
they owned
symbol.
big cats.
Yeah,
right?
he did own a big cat. I don't know if he still does. I don't know how much money he has now.
Just saying.
A couple fun facts. You ready?
Shoot.
In their artwork, you see a lot of animals in there. The eagle represents the sun and is representative of the sun and of warriors. Serpents represent water or fire, which doesn't make sense to me because those are kind of opposite. Conch shells was an important symbol of fertility, and frogs and sea creatures represent talic symbols. So you'll find these things all over the place in their temples, in their artwork, all sorts of stuff. Did you also ever notice that all of the temples always have double staircases facing the west towards the sun?
I did not.
You did not, but they did. Did you see the one in Chichen Itza where the sun goes down at a certain time and it makes the serpent in the shadow?
Yep.
That's crazy. How did they know to do that?
Yeah, well, they're pretty smart, I
They're
think.
pretty good. They're way better at stuff than I am. All right, did you also see that the tops were flat? Do you know why they were flat?
For sacrificing
For
people?
sacrificing people.
they
were
were-
big into that. Like, I think
Yeah.
that was, like, I felt like it's exaggerated or made up, but they have, like, whole flat tops just to kill people. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was interesting. What else do you got?
So I got a bit of a timeline up until Cortez showed up.
Okay, can I go with one other thing that was built?
Shoot.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right, so the pyramids of the sun and moon. I think you talked about that just a little bit ago. Fun fact, the pyramid of the sun was built on a lava tube cave, and they think that was one of the reasons that they picked this. But it's the third largest pyramid in the world, and so far, as they continue to dig around it and try and excavate it, they've dug some ridiculous number of miles. like 8 kilometers or 5 miles of tunnels have been dug to investigate its secrets, and they just keep finding more and more chambers, like under the ground and everywhere. This thing is gigantic. The base of it, or the volume of it, is estimated to be 4.45 million cubic meters. This thing is giant. It's just housing
third
everything.
in the world. Like when you think of big pyramids, you're thinking like Giza, and but the fact that the third largest is down in Mexico, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I thought so as well. It's like right next door.
I never third largest. That's
yeah. All right, go ahead. Let's hear your timeline.
Okay, so it's a pretty short one. So 1325-ish. This is whenever that whole murder
got driven out of their original land.
Yeah, that whole murder marriage thing happened to get it started. We say Montezuma, and it's actually Moctezuma is the way they would pronounce it.
I saw it spelled 2 different ways as well.
Yeah, and the pronunciations that I heard was Moctezuma.
Okay.
So Moctezuma the First. This was in 1440 to 1469.
I didn't realize there were 2 either until researching
the second Montezuma is the more famous one. So this is the one that actually met Cortez. So Montezuma the second was 1502 to 1520.
Was this a son? Because there's a big gap in years right there.
There was other leaders in between.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, they had somewhere in the neighborhood of like 10 to 12 leaders during their 200 plus years that they were an actual civilization. So in 1519, Cortez, Spanish conquistador, hooks up with Montezuma. They meet. They end up staying at the palace. They give him a place. Crazy story. Cortez and some of his conquistadors kidnap Montezuma and kind of hold him hostage.
Ransom.
He's still the leader, so he ended up supposedly being a bit of a puppet for the Spanish. Like he kind of kept his people under control and made them, kind of do what the Spanish wanted them to do. Eventually he dies. There's some interim leaders. And then finally in 1521, the Aztec capital fell and the Spanish took over. And that was just like them defeating them in battle. But then the horrible thing that happened was they said something like 90% of the Aztec population was killed by disease that the Spanish brought over. So these Spanish folks, like they had literally no such thing as smallpox or any other diseases. And they basically...
Did they do that intentionally? Or did it just kind of happen because they brought it along with them?
There's one story that I saw in the documentary where they sacrificed a Spanish conquistador in his blood, and they were disgusting with the blood and spreading it everywhere. But I don't know if that's how you get smallpox.
I don't know. I don't think we get it so much anymore.
Blood. I think it's more like a cough kind of thing. So
yeah. Didn't they take all their gold and silver too? Yeah. And the Aztecs were like, "That's fine. We don't care about this stuff.
All they wanted was cocoa beans.
We want cacao beans. Yeah. Done." Okay, a couple things. Shoot. So to summarize this, as we're going to compare them to the Mayans and the Egyptians coming up here, some of their major contributions were they required education for their peoples, mathematics with a 20-base system, astronomy, medicine, the canoe. They worked on aqueducts of their own, calendars. They created drills and gardens and land that was basically built on top of a swamp or a lake, so like floating.
Yeah, I feel like
cities.
Their contribution to agriculture is a big one.
Quite amazing. So they did a lot. Pretty cool stuff, and I'm interested to find out how the other two stack up.
So what we're going to do is we're going to take some categories and compare the three and determine who the... What did you entitle this? Smackdown?
Civilization Smackdown.
Okay.
No?
No, I like it.
Okay, good. Well, until next time, I think we're going to go look into those two, and that's about it.
All righty. See ya.